Go. And good evening, and thank you to the Florida Library for inviting me and Marie. My name is Evan Weiner. I've been a journalist in radio and newspapers since I'm 15 years old. Spring Valley High School down in Rockland County, about 35, 40 miles from you. I was in 11th grade, and an Orange County resident by the name of Joe Dionisio was my teacher. He said, "You have a good voice. How would you like to be in radio?" I said, "In the worst way," and I was. I did the Spring Valley High School 15-minute weekly show on WRKL radio, which you can get up there. It's all Polish now, 910 on the dial. So that was the start of my career. I was on WNEW radio between 1978, when I was 21, 1981, doing some news for them, and I've covered sports, I've been in TV, done radio, doing podcasts now, and newspapers and magazines. And that guy there is Yogi Berra, and I get to speak a lot at Yogi's museum from around 2006 to 2011, while Dave Kaplan was running it. And Yogi was awfully nice to me, over those years. And he always, I'd give a talk, he always came up to me, pat me on the back and said, "Good job, kid. Good job, kid. We got some food for you back there." And back there was that office. Yogi Berra was the center of the baseball universe in the 1950s. In fact, you saw him at a lot of places. You saw him on What's My Line. You would see him on Wonderama on Channel 5 in New York. You'd see him on The Bilko Show. You'd see him in commercials in the 1950s, 1960s. I Want My Mapo. In the 1970s, you saw Yogi at the movies. And he finished up with the Affleck commercial in his declining years, where he's in the barbershop and drives the Affleck duck crazy. In the 1950s, the so-called golden age of baseball, although I have friends around the country who say it wasn't so golden. It might have been golden in New York, because between 1950 and 1958, every year there was a New York team in the World Series. And in 1959, the remnants of the Brooklyn Dodgers in Los Angeles, that team was in the World Series, and then the Yankees through 1964. So the golden age of baseball, certainly Yogi was right in the middle of it. And there was a French philosopher. His name was Jacques Barzun. He wrote a series of essays in the 50s, and he was basically a writer. And in 1954, he said, "Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And don't do it by going to a major league game. No. That doesn't work. Go to a minor league game. Or better yet, go to a high school game. Or better yet, go to see the kids play on the sandlots, because that's where you see America interacting with one another." And of course, Yogi was part of that golden age of the 1950s of baseball. An age that has not been replicated and probably will not be replicated ever again in the industry. Baseball goes back a long time in the American culture. In fact, Andrew Johnson in 1865, after the Civil War had ended, was looking for a common way, or a way to find commonality among the people who had just finished the war between the North and South. And he thought baseball would be a good healing thing for the country. And he got the members of the Brooklyn Atlantics baseball team and the Washington team together at the White House in 1865 to promote unity through baseball. This guy here comes around about 1888. His name is Casey, and there's no joy in Mudville, because the mighty Casey has struck out. Now, back in 1965, around this time, 1965, 56 years ago, I was in 4th grade, and I was 8, or just turned 9. On April 2nd, I turned 9 in 1965. And I had a teacher by the name of Miss Alexander. She'd been around, let's say that. We all thought she was about 133 years old. She had the blue hair, and she had the white blouse and the blue skirt and the napkin tucked in here in case her nose ran. She just pulled the napkin out and wiped her nose, and it went back in. And she was my 4th grade teacher. And she gives out an assignment. It is April and it's baseball season, particularly back then when baseball was really celebrated. And the assignment is read the poem, Casey at the Bat. And then write a couple sentences about what you think of Casey at the Bat. And so I read Casey at the Bat, and I said, this guy's a lousy player. He struck out, the game's on the line, he struck out, and all the fans are upset. If I was a Mudville fan too, you know, he's a lousy player. Hand that in. And the good thing I wasn't marked because Miss Alexander said, oh, no. That poem is all about man's failures, that man is set up to succeed, and yet he might fail. And I looked at it and I said, he's still a rotten, lousy player. He struck out with the bases loaded. No joy in Mudville today, for the mighty Casey has struck out. Who was Casey? Well, we don't know. Might have been Mike King Kong Kelly. He played in New England at the time. The author of this, and the author who wrote it, it was in the San Francisco Examiner, didn't put his name to it, put his nickname to it, Finn. He was up in New England. Well, we didn't know he was in New England because we didn't know who Finn was when it was printed. But it might have been King Kong Kelly. He was a big time player in the 1880s in New England. And in Stockton, California, they say, no, Casey is ours. In fact, the Stockton minor league team is named the Mudville Nine. And then there was a guy the other day when I was doing this talk who said, how about Dave Casey, who played with Baltimore in the mid-1880s, who was a pretty good player, but nobody seems to know because the author who wrote it anonymously never said who it was. But we found out who it was. It was Ernest Thayer. He was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner. He and I have one thing in common. He wrote for the San Francisco Examiner op-ed pieces between 1886 and 1888. And I did some op-ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner in the 21st century in the calendar year 2001. Casey was printed on June 3rd, 1888. No author's credit. Thayer did not take any credit for it, but he would read the poem at a Harvard class reunion in 1895. By 1895, Casey was ingrained in the American culture, and he was ingrained because of this guy, DeWolf Hopper. Some of you might have known his daughter, Heather Hopper. She was a frequent guest on TV in the 1960s. She was had been an actress who turned gossip columnist when gossip columnists were big in newspapers, like Walter Winchell. Well, nobody was as big as Winchell, but Heather Hopper was up there. Rona Barrett, I think, was the last one of a dying breed of that type. Anyway, Hopper gets a copy of this poem. Nobody is sure how he got it. San Francisco was a lonely outpost, didn't have that many people in the 1880s. But somehow Hopper would get a hold of this poem, and he liked it. And by August the 14th, 1888, he's on stage performing Casey at the Bat. And it is estimated that Hopper performed the poem more than 10,000 times in his career, whether it would be on the vaudeville stage, whether it would be on record, whether it would be in the movies. More than 10,000 times the mighty Casey struck out, which is far more than Mickey Mantle struck out. But Hopper did this for about 35 years, and the mixed career was only 18 years. That is the Springfield, New Jersey Library. And I spoke there a couple of years ago. They're not doing talks right now, although I think they're coming back online very shortly. The Springfield, New Jersey Little City Museum is inside the library, inside this big meeting room, and they got all this stuff hanging around the place, including this thing. Apparently there was a hermit who lived in Springfield, New Jersey, and he passed away and they couldn't find any heirs, and he had some rather interesting things like this thing, a cylinder player that the library ended up getting. Now this cylinder player actually still works. Debbie, who's the library director at the Springfield, New Jersey Library, actually played that for me. I think it's a Stars and Stripes Forever or something, and it works. But If you had one of those in, say, 1893, and you wanted to listen to Casey at the Bat in the comfort of your home, not seeing Hopper on the stage, well, you could because of this guy. His name is Russell Hunting. He was an entertainer, and he played around with sound. He was a sound recorder, played around with it, and he recorded this thing twice, in 1893 and again in 1898. Both times he used a heavy Irish brogue, probably because he thought Casey was Irish. In 1905, John Kaiser records it for Thomas Edison down in Menlo Village, Menlo Park in New Jersey. And then Hopper recorded it for Victor before it became RCA Victor and his master's voice, Nipper the dog. And that would come out in 1906. Now, if you're around in the 1900s and you have one of these, a gramophone, phonograph that you crank up, you could actually listen to Casey at the Bat in your house, and you could hear Hopper performing Casey at the Bat in your house. This picture was taken 2 falls ago in 2019, in October 2019, in Sagway, Chicoutimi, Quebec. I speak on cruise ships, and I'm always looking for places like this. I love places like this. And this guy opens his garage when cruise ships come in. The 4 times a year they go to Chicoutimi, and you can walk right through his big garage and see things like that. And I said, you know what? I need to take a picture of that for the baseball talk. And right next to him, Edison phonographs, right next to him. Hopper would be the first to commit Casey at Bat to film, and that was a short subject made by Lee DeForest in 1922. Wallace Beery starred in a 1927 film version of it. The comic, Jerry Colonna, some of you, well, Bob Hope, was big in the 1930s, 40s, up through the 60s and 70s. Anyway, his second banana was Jerry Colonna. Some of you might recall him. And the big bushy mustache. Where's Yehuda was his catch line. And he records a rendition for the Disney cartoon, Casey at the Bat, and that cell you saw before was the Disney cell of Casey at the Bat. Jackie Gleason performed it on his television show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others also voiced the poem, often in orchestral settings. The others included joint appearance by George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin in Tampa with the local orchestra in Tampa, and they raised money for the Tampa PBA. If you saw this sign, you were on the, let's say you were on the New York City subway. It's 1908, and you saw this sign, and I don't know if Dr. Zinsmore's Zitz ads were up in 1908, but certainly they're all over the place in the subway. But if you saw the subway sign, you might say, hey, you know what? I have nothing to do. The game started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're over around 5 o'clock. Maybe I'll go see a ball game at the Polo Grounds. Maybe I'll just do that. And there was one day, there was this songwriter, entertainer by the name of Jack Norwith. And he's staring at the sign and he's thinking. He's staring and he's thinking, might be good to write a song about baseball. And so he's looking, and eventually he sees his friend, another songwriter by the name of Albert von Tilzer, and they come up with this song that this guy revitalized. In the 1980s and the 1990s. I actually worked with him in the winter of 1994. Harry Carey, the Chicago Cubs, late Chicago Cubs announcer, St. Louis Cardinals announcer, Oakland A's announcer, but it was in Chicago that it would be at Wrigley Field at the in between the top of the 7th and the bottom of the 7th inning that Harry Carey, off key and rather badly, would sing, "Take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. They don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game." Well, there's, by the way, here's a picture of Harry. What's missing in this picture with Harry He's got 6 of his closest friends named Bud with him as he's broadcasting the game on WGN in Chicago. And their last name was Weiser, Bud Weiser. He's got at least 6 of his friends named Bud with him. Harry's gone, but the tradition continues in Wrigley Field. They have famous people singing the Take Me Out to the Ballgame song under one condition. You have to sing it badly, because Harry sung it badly. But let's take a look at the song, because you only really listen to one stanza. You know, Katie Casey, the woman, is the one who tells her boyfriend, take me out to the ball game. First stanza, well, we know Katie Casey has the baseball bug and she has it bad, and she either has a boyfriend or a husband, probably a boyfriend, maybe just a friend, and they kind of meet and he wants to take her somewhere. He wants to take her to a show, and no, I don't want to go to a show. Take me out to the ball game. Well, we don't know if Katie Casey ever went to the ball game with her beau, who blew every sow on her. That was a term back in those days, and it's in the preamble to the "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" stanza. So we don't know if she really ever went to the baseball game with this guy. Why did Norwith write it? That's a good question. If you listen to the song and think of it differently, sung from Katie Casey's viewpoint, she probably was in her 20s in 1908, and women were not supposed to go to baseball games. It was an unladylike thing to do. The players were considered ruffians and villains and thugs, and not people you want to really be hanging around with. And yet here is Katie Casey, who's a big baseball fan, who in the third stanza knows every player. She knows every player, and they didn't have numbers on their back, nor did they have their names on the back. And not only that, if she sees a bad call, she's not going to hold back. She's going to tell the umpire what she thinks of this whole thing and why the umpire is wrong. So she has her opinion. Now, that's kind of unusual in 1908. 2 years ago, in the Washington Post, a woman wrote an op-ed piece talking about, well, this may be the first women's liberation song of all time. Now, why did Norwith write it? Well, he saw the sign, but his former girlfriend was one of the suffragettes. I don't know if she was Alice Paul level suffragette that she would go on a hunger strike and kill herself for a vote, but apparently she was very capable. And he might have written it with her in mind. He broke up with her and ended up with another entertainer by the name of Nora Bayes, who would make the song famous on the vaudeville stage. Norworth and Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game at that point. In fact, Norworth would not see a baseball game until 1928, 20 years after the song came out. Von Tilzer would hold out until 1940, 32 years after the song came out. But the song would become very famous on the vaudeville stage. Nora Bayes, who was then Norwith's wife, and apparently he had quite a few wives in his time. This lasted only a couple of years. But anyway, Nora Bayes popularized it. She was on stage with him as well for a while, along with another song called Shine On Harvest Moon. Both songs written around the same time. Only one song is played on a daily basis between late February and almost November every year, all around North America, whether it be in Canada or in the United States, or maybe in Mexico or some other places like South Korea or Australia or the Caribbean, where baseball is played. Of course, the song is Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Von Tilzer and Norwith are in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and of course, the song is ingrained in baseball. But it wasn't ingrained all that quickly. It took a long time. Major League Baseball finally saw the song and saw some value in the song during the 1934 World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and Detroit Tigers in Detroit. It's played there for the first time. The song would take on a life of its own elsewhere. Night at the Opera, Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx is working for Margaret Dumont, who's the patron of the opera, some opera company in New York City, and they go over to Italy, and Margaret Dumont has her eye on who is supposedly the world's most famous tenor, and she's going to sign him up to bring him to New York to perform during the opera season. Okay, that sounds simple enough, but of course Groucho is there, and Groucho runs into Harpo and Chico, and they have a friend played by Alan Jones, who is the world's greatest tenor in their mind. And of course, that would be also in Groucho's mind because it's the Marx Brothers, right? And they bring him over. There's the stateroom scene and there's all kinds of stuff. But finally, they get to the opera house. And here's the problem. They got to knock out the good tenor and put in the friend of Harpo and Chico. And to do that, they have to literally knock out the guy from Italy. So Harpo and Chico are there, and they got sheet music, and they have to kill some time. And the orchestra is playing, you know, the overture, the aria, whatever they're playing, and they have to kill some time. And so they have sheet music, and they put the sheet music in front of every musician, and it breaks out to "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Harpo and Chico have a catch, and Groucho comes down and starts selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks. They also did some minor baseball skits in other movies, the Marx Brothers, just basically on sliding or throwing balls back and forth. Harpo Marx would return to the song, The I Love Lucy Show, in 1955. The song's been in numerous movies and TV shows. Hey, Abbott and Costello. Who's on first? What's on second? Routine that was known, that is known among the comics as rounders. Baseball evolved from a game called rounders. Simply, this routine was a common style on the vaudeville stage or the burlesque, two burlesques. You spell burlesque B-U-R-L-E-S-K, and the women take their clothes off. If you spell it with a Q-U-E on the end, it's a family show. Abbott and Costello met on the burlesque with the Q-U-E circuit. Rounders. So what was rounders? Well, rounders was a comedic style where you had the idiot or the pinhead, here played by Costello, who is basically peppering the smart aleck, played by Abbott, with questions. And for instance, Abbott here is the manager of the St. Louis Wolves, and Costello is a big baseball fan. And Costello runs into Abbott, and he wants to know about the lineup of the St. Louis Wolves, and you know, who's on first? And Abbott would say, who? Well, who's on first? I'm asking you who's on first. That's the man's name, who? And they go round and round and round and round and round in circles. And like I said, very common routine at that time on different subjects. Baseball probably evolved from an English game called rounders. And I speak in the Berkshires every summer. I don't know if I'm going to be speaking live there or on Zoom. More than likely, it's going to be on Zoom. In fact, I know it's going to be on Zoom because I got one talk in Pittsfield next week, and we're talking about the summer. And I don't think they're going to allow people in quite yet. I know Tanglewood is going to be very limited, and Tanglewood is outside up in the Berkshires. But Tanglewood's a music place for those who don't know. But anyway, so there is a little baseball museum up at the Berkshires, up near North Adams or in North Adams, Massachusetts. There's an old factory that's been converted into an art museum. And across the street from that place is a baseball museum. And unfortunately, I got out of that museum, the art museum, way too late to go across the street to explore the baseball museum, except it was a storefront, and it really only honored local guys like Jack Chesborough, who grew up there, won 41 games with the New York Highlanders in 1904, the predecessor of the New York Yankees, because they played up in the highest part of Manhattan back at the turn of after 1903, when the Yankees started, or the Highlanders started and changed their name to the Yankees in the teens. But they had a little article there talking about baseball and how baseball was played in the Berkshires in 1792. Baseball, B-A-S-E, another word, ball, B-A-L-L, 1872, or 1782 rather. The Mills Commission, around the turn of the 20th century, was looking for where baseball was invented. And it couldn't have come out of Rounders or any other game. It had to be an American game. It's an American game. So they're looking and looking and looking, and they're looking for people. And there's this story about Abner Doubleday inventing baseball, and how that was somehow around, a myth. But hey, you don't need the exact beginnings of the game because nobody knows. And they're looking around. They get out to Denver and they find a guy by the name of Abner Graves. Abner Graves was a drunk. He was once arrested for killing his wife. He was in his 60s and didn't have much of a memory, but he swore that as a 5-year-old in Cooperstown, New York, he watched Abner Doubleday lay out the field, get everybody on the field, and play baseball. I don't know about that story, but Abner was their guy, even though he was a drunk, even though he's accused of killing his wife and all this other stuff. But Abner was the guy. And Abner said, hey, Abner Doubleday really did invent baseball. I was 5 years old. I watched it in Cooperstown. Of course, Doubleday, General Doubleday, was at West Point at the time. And there was no record ever of him inventing baseball. He was in the Civil War, no record in any of his diaries about baseball. It's a great myth, and that's all it is a myth. Evan Costello, who's on first, what's on second? Vaudeville style, vaudeville act that was common. But here's the question. Did Abbott and Costello pay Michael Musto $15 for the routine? Now I speak on cruise ships, and I know a lot of the comedians we keep in touch. And there's one comedian, he's from Long Island, John Joseph, and he does an offshoot of this, but a music offshoot of this, or did with his partner Johnny B, or ex-partner Johnny B. And we're talking about that one day. By the way, John Joseph's mentor was somebody who you probably saw on TV if you're of a certain age, Alan King, who is always on the Ed Sullivan Show. But anyway, John and I talked about the routine, and I said, did Abbott and Costello pay Michael Musto, who might have come up with the routine or might not have come up with the routine, $15 for the routine? And John, of course, said yes. One of my other friends, Max Docelli, who grew up with Seinfeld and Larry David and Carol Leifler and Paul Reiser in that group, and ended up spending 40 years on cruise ships entertaining, the king of cruise ship entertainment as a comedian. Anyway, I said, come on, we're comedians. We steal everything. Like Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis played up at not far from you, the Borscht Belt. And he was there as a young guy and used to observe comedians. He probably took routines from others who did them okay and just did them better. If you do it better, it becomes yours, like Rodney Dangerfield. He got, I don't get no respect from George Schultz. So anyway, Abbott and Costello, did they pay Musto? Unknown. Did Musto write this thing? He claimed he did, but nobody seems to know. Yeah, it was a baseball burlesque routine, and it's been suggested that Abbott at one point did a version of this kind of routine before meeting Costello on the burlesque circuit. They get the thing around 1936, and by 1937, they're on the vaudeville circuit doing this, and then they get a spot on the Kate Smith radio show, which was on CBS. And on the Kate Smith show, it's March, I think it was the 24th, 1938. Obviously, it's during spring training. They do the routine on the Kate Smith radio show, and the rest is history. Kate Smith was one of the top-rated radio shows at the time. They may have gotten some help on cleaning up the routine from John Grant, who is Costello's writer, and Will Glickman, a comedy writer who lasted into the 1960s and did Car 54, Where Are You scripts. Abbott and Costello performed at the White House, performed in the movies. They did it for FDR and Truman and Eisenhower. They were on radio, they were on TV, and they were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame, outsiders enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in 1956. About 15 years ago, Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer who started his career in 1950, with the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field at the age of 21, is looking at his monitor. Vin did simulcast games on both radio and TV, the first 2 innings, and then 3 through 9, he was all alone on TV. But anyway, he's looking up, and he says something to the effect of this: now we know the answer to baseball's eternal question, who's on first? Ladies and gentlemen, there is who. The Dodgers had a player by the name of Who, came from South Korea. And here's the image that Vin Scully saw, who's on first. There was a Watt, guy named Watt, played second base with Washington in the 1920s before this routine hit. But I can guarantee you this: there has never been a player from Little League on up to the major leagues played third base whose name was I don't give a darn. 4 years ago, I went up to Hyde Park because I wanted to see Franklin Roosevelt, because I needed to talk to him about, I do 3 talks that Roosevelt would be central in. One is presidential impact on sports, but also the 1936 Olympics. Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller and Avery Brundage and the Hitler Olympics and all that. And, so it's actually 4 talks now that I think of it, but subject is the same in 2 of the talks. And anyway, I was going to ask him why he sent the Olympic team to Berlin in 1936 to legitimize the Hitler regime. And then 1939, I do a talk on the early days of TV. He was the first guy on TV in the United States. And also, why they allowed baseball to go on after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Yeah, I got my answers to everything. Actually, I got my answer to 1936 because I worked with Marty Glickman in the 1980s, who never ran, in the 4x100 relay with Sam Stoller, because he felt Avery Brundage he wanted to spare the Fuhrer the opportunity of seeing 2 Jews on the podium in Germany. And he substituted him with Jesse Owens, and of course Jesse Owens stole the show there. But Roosevelt thought, and Marty backed this up, Roosevelt thought that it would be good for Americans to compete in the 36 Olympics, and Marty really wanted to compete. As far as TV, well, he was a natural before crowds, fireside chats on radio, no big deal. And 1942 season, this guy, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, he was the commissioner of baseball. And he writes a letter to Roosevelt saying, what are we supposed to do? The nation's at war. Should we continue, or should we just lay out until the war is over? After all, in 1918, in baseball, the American League owners decide to curtail the season. We pushed up the World Series. In fact, the owners, the American League guys, didn't even want to play the World Series, which would have been stupid because the Boston Red Sox would not have won. They beat the Chicago Cubs behind the left arm of Babe Ruth, who used to hold the consecutive scoreless innings record in the World Series. But Kennesaw Mountain Landis wanted an answer. Should we or shouldn't we play? And Roosevelt sends him what is called the green light letter. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Remember, baseball is so ingrained in the country by 1941-42. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours or 2.5. Roosevelt's been dead since 1975, so hasn't really watched any Red Sox Yankees ESPN games over the last 10 years, right? 4.5 hours, 9 innings, and which could be got for very little cost, $80 for the bleacher creatures. Opening day, bleachers, Yankee Stadium, $80. Roosevelt, his class could afford it. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. Roosevelt sat out with Jackie Robinson. I normally don't bring this in, but it is Jackie Robinson Day today because 74 years ago, he broke into Major League Baseball. And Jackie is mentioned a little later in this talk, but very briefly, but I wanted to bring up that today was Jackie Robinson's debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers 74 years ago. The movies. Babe Ruth. Babe was in 10 movies. 10 movies. 1920 silent film, Heading Home, stars Babe as what else? A baseball player. His last movie was Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story. 1927, he starred in a movie called Babe Comes Home. Another baseball movie. It's a silent movie. The print is disintegrated. A lot of prints from those days have absolutely disintegrated because they didn't care for them and the way they were made. He also appeared in a Harold Lloyd silent movie, which is still there. They preserved this one in 1928 called Speedy. He played himself. He was signing autographs for kids, and he had to get to Yankee Stadium, and Harold Lloyd's playing a cab driver, and Babe calls him. He needs a cab to go up to Yankee Stadium. And it's a cab ride never to be forgotten by Babe Ruth. Altogether, he was in 10 movies. But he wasn't the first big baseball star to make it in the movies or on Broadway or in vaudeville. That would be Mike Donlin. He was the baseball idol of Manhattan, played with the New York Giants. Pretty good player, hit .333. But you didn't make money playing baseball back then. So he took multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville. He retired for good in 1914, went right into the movies. Again, typecast, right off the bat, a baseball movie, which featured his New York Giants manager, John J. McGraw, who also was a bit of an actor and was in a few movies. Donlin, it is said, made about 53 appearances on film. I guarantee you some of those films were done in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And the Fort Lee, New Jersey Library, the parking lot there are signs all over the place talking about how Fort Lee and that spot was the film capital of the world in the 19-teens. And it's in the parking lot of the Fort Lee Library today. Lou Gehrig was in the movie. He was the star of a movie called Rawhide. It's a terrible movie. It really is. It's a nothing movie. They put him on a 10-gallon hat or a cowboy hat. He's retiring. He's got a big news conference, Grand Central Terminal. He's had it with baseball. He's retiring, and too much of the rat race and too much pressure on him. So he and his sister, Gehrig was married at the time to Ellie, but he and his sister decide to buy this ranch in Montana, and they're going to live the rest of their lives in peace and tranquility and solitude, far away from Yankee Stadium as you could get. Of course, it's kind of stupid because Gehrig grew up in New York City, went to primary school in New York City, went to Columbia University, played for the New York Yankees, lived in New Rochelle. There's still a sign on the street where he lived in New Rochelle, by the former grounds of the College of New Rochelle, which is out of business or went out of business last year. And he was New York all the way. Terrible movie, except for one thing. Gehrig shoots this movie around 1938. He's diagnosed with ALS in 1939. And the doctors have some film on Gehrig. They had film on Gehrig in those Foxtone movies in the 1930s where you went to the movie house, or cartoons, double feature, all that other stuff in the news. But that really didn't give them an opportunity to see how Gehrig really walked, how he swung his arms, moved his head, and all that other stuff. So they were able to study Gehrig's movement from a year and a half before and figure out how quickly the disease infiltrated and took over his body. Babe Ruth also has some medical research value, as did Gehrig. He had throat cancer, and he was given, one of the first people ever given chemotherapy. Worked a little bit and then went off the side, and Babe would pass away in 1948. So the two guys, Ruth and Gehrig, actually contributed to medical research. The film was called Rawhide. Terrible film. Hey, my hero, Bugs Bunny. Everything I learned in life, I learned from Warner Brothers cartoons. Here he is. Oh, he's a heckler out in the outfield. He's got his bag of popcorn, his half-eaten carrot, along with his carriages. He's heckling and he's telling the Gas House Guerrillas, I could murder you with one arm tied behind my back. Gas House Guerrillas, it was the Gas House Gang, the St. Louis Cardinals in 1934. They're beating the teetotalers. Bugs challenges them. They accept the challenge, and Bugs would win. League of Their Own. This film might be in your library. Madonna jumping into Rosie O'Donnell's arms. Gina Davis with the chest protector. Tom Hanks is in this movie. He's playing a character based on the Hall of Fame slugger Jimmy Fox, who managed in what was a real league for women between 1943 and 1952 out in the Midwest, put together by Phil Wrigley, the owner of the Chicago Cubs, who my dentist thanks for making his products, double mint gum, juicy fruit gum, and all that. My dentist says, right on, Phil. Think of all the money you put in my pocket from him. Anyway, this is a movie. I'm sure you have it at the library. Casey Candell, who's now a coach with Seattle, who I got to know in the 1990s when he was a player with Montreal, was a technical advisor on this thing. And he told me his mother taught him how to hit the curveball, which is why he made the major leagues. There was a documentary called League of Their Own by Candell's sister that was turned into the movie. Anyway, Tom Hanks' character says there's no crying in baseball. Gary Cooper is Lou Gehrig's story. I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Nobody gave that speech too much attention after Gehrig gave it in 1939. But when it was in the movie, and it was in the movie, people started paying attention to it because Carey Cooper said it, not Gehrig. Kevin Costner, Tim Robbins, and Bull Durham. Typical minor league story written by a guy by the name of Ron Shelton, who played with the Baltimore Orioles organization in the 1960s, the veteran catcher who never really made it to the major leagues, but guy that you want to keep around because he's a smart guy and he could maybe penetrate the head of the guy played by Tim Robbins here, has $1 million arm and a 10-cent head. And there is the love triangle here with Baseball Annie. Susan Sarandon, Bull Durham. Jerry Lewis, when the Brooklyn Dodgers departed Flatbush and headed out to Los Angeles, the players became the darling of the film industry. And here is Jerry Lewis instructing Pee Wee Reese what he wants done in the movie The Geisha Boy, which featured also Don Zimmer back there. So Jerry Lewis took advantage of the Dodgers moving out to Los Angeles. Robert Redford in the movie The Natural. I'm sure you have the book in the library, The Natural, as well. Kevin Costner again talking to an actor playing Joe Jackson in Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come here. They built it last year in the middle of COVID, a cornfield stadium in Iowa. And the Yankees and White Sox were supposed to play a game there, but COVID wiped it out last year. They were hoping to play a game there this year. And there's Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane in Moneyball about analytics. Billy Beane was a New York Mets first-round draft pick in 1980. Smartest guy in baseball. All you have to do is ask him, and he will tell you that. But it's all about analytics. It's the Michael Lewis book, which you probably have in the library, Moneyball, and then came the movie with Brad Pitt about Billy Beane and the Oakland A's and analytics. Walter Matthau, oh, he was so good, whether it's facing the crowd or playing the same role opposite Jack Lemmon in The Fortune Cookie, The Odd Couple, Grumpy Old Men. He was good with whatever he did. Here he is as the coach of the Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bill Bonds. Of course, he played Oscar Madison in the 1968 Odd Couple movie. Talk about that in a few minutes. Major League with Charlie Sheen, 1 and 2. And there's me, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, October of 2018. And I'm in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh. And that's where Forbes Field was at one time. And the only thing left of Forbes Field is that old wall, which is right next to an academic building near Schenley Park in Pittsburgh. And you go to my right, your left, all the way down a bit, you'll see where Bill Mazeroski hit the home run in 1960, the walk-off home run to beat the New York Yankees. And Yogi following the baseball going over the fence. And I said to Yogi, why'd you bother? He said, oh, I just wanted to see where it was going. And there's the spot where the ball allegedly hit is painted in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh grounds. But I bring this up because Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, both in 1946, they're on the road to baseball. Remember, they did the Road to movies. Bill Veeck sold a small chunk of the Cleveland Indians to Bob Hope in 1946. Hope was born in England, but grew up in Cleveland, and he jumped at getting a small share of his hometown team. And Bing Crosby invested in the Pirates the same year that Hope invested in the Indians. And the reason I bring that up is that a movie was shot at Forbes Field, probably Bing recommended it, called Angels in the Outfield. There are many more movies. It's just a handful of movies I'm talking about here. Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, Moneyball, and because we're in New York, I gotta mention this, the awful movie starring Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and Fred Mertz, William Frawley, who was a huge Yankee fan. In fact, I do a Lucille Ball talk, how she was the most powerful businesswoman in Hollywood in the 1960s. And I was reading about how William Frawley was such a Yankee fan that he was allowed to go to Yankee World Series games in the 1950s, and he'd skip shooting the Lucy show. And he ends up being the manager of the Yankees in this awful movie. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning picture. There are very few Pulitzer prizes given out to sports. My old buddy, the late Dave Anderson of the New York Times, was a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist with the New York Times. This picture was taken by a guy by the name of Nat Fine, who was working with the New York Journal-American. And this is from 1948, and it's dying Babe Ruth for the last time out on the baseball field. I was 23 years old back in 1979, and I worked with WGRC Radio. That was my full-time job, and I moonlighted occasionally with WNEW Radio in New York. Among the stories that I got when I was 23 with WNEW was interviewing candidate Ronald Reagan running for president up at Bear Mountain. It was me, him, and about 3 other people. That was it. January of 1980. But anyway, Nat Fine was an award-winning photographer who ended up his career taking pictures of utility poles for Orange and Rockland Utilities because he needed a job. In 1965, his paper, the Journal-American, merged with the Herald Tribune and the New York World and Sun, or Telegram, whatever it was. And Nat was out of a job. But he was a big deal once, a really big deal once. And I know how to get a scoop. I've gotten 4 major scoops in my journalism career, and it doesn't take ability. It's the right place at the right time. And that's how I got on WNEW in 1978. John Lindsay, we're at the Tappan Zee Townhouse in Nyack, New York, told me he's running for Senate in 1980. And I sent it in to UPI and AP, and I get a call from WNEW. I'm 21 years old, and bang, I'm on WNEW, 50,000 watts. So it's the right place at the right time. And I was talking to Nat about this. I said, how did you get this shot, which won the Pulitzer Prize? And if you notice, there are two people that you can see immediately shooting Babe Ruth from the first baseline at Yankee Stadium. Babe's on the third baseline. In the old days, the Yankees dugout was on the third base side. And Nat told me he was in with the gaggle, taking pictures of the Babe getting dressed and all that. And the gaggle went out in the field, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to follow Babe up the steps, and I'll get to the gaggle. But he said Babe was walking so slowly and leaning on the bat, and finally just stops, and bang, he has his picture. Nat has his picture simply because he's in the right place at the right time. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning picture. Homer Simpson, honored by baseball's Hall of Fame in 2017 because he scored the winning run for the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant, making them the city champions. Springfield in 1992, the nuclear power plant was playing a bunch of players from Major League Baseball. Oh, Wilbur, TV. There's Sandy Koufax, and I'm not sure who he's signing that autograph for. Is it for Mr. Ed, or is it for Wilbur? Played by Alan Young, Wilbur Post in the Mr. Ed Show. Johnny Roseborough was also in the Mr. Ed Show, the Dodger catcher. Leo DeRocher appears out of nowhere to sign Herman Munster, who's playing baseball at a field adjacent to his house on 1313 Mockingbird Lane in the Munsters. And Herman gets a tryout with the Dodgers, but he's 7'4". He weighs 7'6". He weighs 540 pounds. Hurling players on the field. The Dodgers can't sign him. But Leo DeRocher was in the Munsters. I knew Jim Lefevre when he was the manager of the Seattle Mariners back in the late 1990s. And here he is, the guy on the left, and the guy on the right is Al Ferrara. They're both with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and they're headhunters, and they're going to shrink Gilligan's head, and then they're going to eat him afterwards. You can see the condiments are out already. Ferrara once said he knew he made it to the major leagues when he had one of these, a baseball card. I asked Lefevre, I said, hey, why didn't you save the castaways? He said, why ruin the show? Guess he had a point there. There is Johnny Roseborough, the Dodger catcher, here on Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. It looks like he should be on Dragnet. Come on, next one. There you go. Walter O'Malley, the Brooklyn Dodgers, Los Angeles Dodgers owner, appeared with the Rifleman star and the one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in an episode of Branded in 1965. Willie Davis, the Dodgers center fielder, acted in The Love Machine, Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front, and The Flying Nun. Roseborough was in Dragnet 1968, Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, An Experiment in Terror. Usually when I'm live, I ask the question, who's the guy on the left? Who's the guy on the right? Zoom has its limitations. The guy on the left is Phil Silvers. The guy on the right is Steve Bilko, who was a great baseball player in the Pacific Coast League with the Los Angeles Angels. He was too good for minor league baseball and was not good enough for a regular job in Major League Baseball. One of those tweeners. But Nat Hiken, the guy who wrote the Phil Silver Show and Car 54, Where Are You? And there, if you ever watch Car 54, Where Are You? There are all kind of references to the New York Yankees. In fact, one of the Car 54, Where Are You shows involves Tootie and Muldoon, and they are supposed to be looking for pickpockets at Yankee Stadium. Anyway, Nat Hiken looked at this guy, Steve Bilko, and said, that's it. That's my man. I'm going to name the character on You Never Get Rich or the Phil Silver Show, Ernie Bilko, or the Sergeant Bilko Show. And so there is another crossover into the culture. Yogi was on that show. And one day I'm talking to Yogi, and I said, hey, Yogi, I saw you on the Bilko Show. He said, yeah. I said, what were you and the other Yankees doing in the middle of Kansas? Because the show allegedly takes place at Fort Baxter in the middle of Kansas. What are you doing there? He said, no, we did it in the Bronx. Yeah, I know you did it in the Bronx, in the Biograph Theater or studios, but what were you doing there? He said, no. He said, I got in my car. I drove across the George Washington Bridge, got on the Cross Bronx Expressway, got off, and I was at the studio. And at that point, I realized that Yogi was right. I was wrong. The Yankees players were in the Bronx. Donna Reed, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, The Munsters, Phil Silver Show, also known as Bilko. It's just some of the shows that baseball players popped on to in the 1960s and 50s. This guy, Moose Stubing of the Bronx, was the manager of the Anaheim Angels in the late 1980s. And this guy was the captain of the Love Boat, Merrill Stubing. Moose Stubing and Merrill Stubing. What could they have in common besides the initials MS? Well, Aaron Spelling, the king of schlock on TV, created Charlie's Angels, and and the pain, Fantasy Island, and the Love Boat, and Dynasty, among others. He used to take the baseball encyclopedia out and just study and look for names to name his TV characters. And he named Captain Steubing of the Love Boat for Moose Steubing. I once asked Moose Steubing about it. I said, you gave money out of it? He said, no, I didn't. He said, but I know it's me. I said, yeah, it is you, isn't it? John Forsythe, who was on Dynasty, landed his first paying job at the ballpark as the ballpark announcer for the Dodgers at Ebbets Field in the 1950s. He had that great voice, And he would star in one of Spelling's biggest hits ever, Dynasty, in the 1980s. And there he is on the right. And on the left is Jack Lemmon. The Dodgers every year have a Hollywood All-Star game. Here's John Forsythe, who started his career, his entertainment career, as the Brooklyn Dodgers PA announcer, playing in the Dodgers uniform. And to his right, your left, is Jack Lemmon, who was in the 1968 movie The Odd Couple, playing Felix Unger. And there is a scene in the movie. Oscar Madison, played by Matthau, of course, is a sports writer. And there's a scene in the movie where Jack Lemmon, Felix Unger calls Oscar at Shea Stadium. And he has the phone number. You see, Oscar's paper should have had a phone, because they all had phones, actually. But he calls the payphone. And I can tell you where the payphone was. The payphone was adjacent to the official scorer's booth. And there was a block in the way, so you really couldn't see the field well. And also, you'd have to turn around to hear who was on the phone, because I used that phone. Anyway, so, hey, Madison, you got a phone call here. And it's Felix saying, what do you want for dinner? Meanwhile, on the field, Bill Mazeroski of the Pittsburgh Pirates, it was originally supposed to be Roberto Clemente, grounds into a triple play. And Oscar hears the screaming and yelling, and he asks what happened. Oh, Madison, you missed the best player of the year, greatest play the Mets have ever had. I guess the Mets were losing in 1968. And anyway, and they get into a fight. They get into their usual fight. And you know the story of Oscar and Felix. Can two divorced men live with each other without driving each other crazy? So Jack Lemmon ruins Oscar Madison's day at Shea Stadium. And there's Bob Uecker, who was the Milwaukee Brewers announcer, who played Major League Baseball with the Milwaukee Braves, the Atlanta Braves, the Philadelphia Phillies, and the St. Louis Cardinals. And his career comes to an end in the late 1960s, and Atlanta hires him as a community ambassador, and he's working on this stand-up routine, and he's pretty good. Al Hurt, the trumpet player, sees him, calls Carson immediately and says, hey, you got to get this guy on the show. And I guess Hurt talked to Freddie DeCovida, who is the showrunner for Johnny, or the producer for Johnny, showrunner. And they get Uke on. Uke kills, and he's invited to the seat next to Johnny. And if you're a comedian, there's no higher honor in the world, as this guy, Wayne Cotter, told me when he got to the seat in the late 1980s. And he said that Carson used to just invite him on like he did Euchre. Don't do your routine, just want to talk to you. Anyway, it's a commercial break, and Euchre is on for the first time, and Johnny leans over to him. He doesn't know who he is. He says, I hear you were a baseball player. And Euchre says, I have one of these, a baseball card, so I must have been. On Broadway, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Damn Yankees. Yankees had won the World Series from 1949 through 53. Washington was a perennial loser by this point. They had been in the World Series in 1933. And Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil. That's the whole plot. You might have seen Damn Yankees. And there was one other song in that, and it was a smash hit on Broadway, and it's been revived over the years. Anyway, there's one other big song in that play. You Gotta Have Heart. And that's what the Amazing Mets sung in 1969 on Ed Sullivan's show. On our stage tonight, a really big show, the Amazing Mets. My cousin was Jerry Stiller, who passed away about a year and a half ago. And he and Ann and Mira were on the show about 36 times, and he told me all the quirkiness about Ed, but he said Ed must have loved when the jocks were on because he started out as a sports writer and also as the Golden Gloves ring announcer while he was working for the Daily News in boxing. And so here's Ed, and Ed must have been in his glory. The amazing Mets. Tom Seaver over there on the middle row on the right. Art Shamsky with double-breasted suit next to Ron Swoboda, who is one of my favorite people. Just funny, funny guy. Anyway, oh, speaking of Cousin Jerry, it's a segue, isn't it, into something else. Here's Jerry with my two kids back in 1994. And, oh, let's segue into a show that Jerry was on, and he played Frank Costanza on Seinfeld. And he's part of one of the stories I'm going to tell you. Now, Marty Appel was the Yankee PR guy, and he left to do other things. And we were talking about Seinfeld one day. And he says, you know, they got some really, really inside information on those George stories that George sends to Larry David. George used to come up with storylines for the Seinfeld show, like Missing George, or Board Meeting Moved, or different uniforms. The storylines. Now, the Missing George one is pretty interesting because it involves a guy who worked for George for American Shipbuilding in Tampa. And George thought this guy was kind of, he was hanging out with the wrong type of people. But anyway, it's Friday afternoon. And George sees everybody, says goodbye to everybody, and says goodbye to this guy for the weekend. Have a good weekend. George comes in like 5 o'clock in the morning, and he sees this guy's car there at 5 o'clock in the morning. And George is, oh no, it happened. It happened. It happened. And he calls the Tampa police. There's an all-point bulletin out there. You think George really was a cartoon character. He really was. I got to know him. Anyway, so you would, you know, and he's, what happened to this guy? What happened to this guy? What happened to this guy? And so they're looking for him. The guy strolls in like 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And George is so relieved. He's so relieved. And the guy's fine. But it becomes a script for Seinfeld. And George Costanza, Jason Alexander's character, George Costanza is the assistant traveling secretary of the Yankees. And he disappears, but his car is in the parking lot. And George Steinbrenner on the show thinks that the guy is dead, George Costanza. And he goes to Jerry Stiller's place and as Frank Costanza. And he says, Mr. Costanza, we have bad news. We think that George, your son George, is dead. And Jerry takes it in for a second, and he looks at Steinbrenner and says, you traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? You traded, which is the best part of the whole show. And yeah, he did trade Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps. Jay had a pretty good career with the Seattle Mariners, and Ken Phelps was a washout. If you knew George, if he saw food you liked, he took it off your plate. And there was a board meeting at Yankee Stadium once. Somebody brought some food in from one of the restaurants around Yankee Stadium. One of the pizza places, whatever, and George moved the entire board meeting to that place. The different uniforms, which shrunk, was tried out. Tampa Yankees in A-ball, Florida State League, and that became George Steinbrenner suggestion in the show. George was actually on the show, but he never made the final cut. He's in the scene with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. It's terrible. Go up to YouTube and watch it. You'll see what I mean. Seinfeld was quoted saying he actually did a scene in the show, and it was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. There was a show involving Keith Hernandez. George Costanza is jealous because Jerry and Keith have bonded and have become best buddies, and George is afraid he's losing Jerry as his best buddy. Roger McDowell was also in that show. Keith said that when his agent Scott Boras called him and said, you want to be on Seinfeld? He said, what's that? Boras said, well, they'll fly you out first class. You'll be in a nice hotel for a weekend. They'll pay you 15 grand. Keith said, oh, I know who he is. He played himself. Actually, he didn't know who he was, but apparently now they are buddies. Keith, of course, on SNY as the Mets announcer. George hosted Saturday Night Live. played in a skit where he played all 9 positions on the field. Coach, manager, general manager, owner, PR guy. It wasn't too far from the truth. If George could have done that, he would have done that. Also on Saturday Night Live, baseball been very, very good to me. Garrett Morris playing Chico Escuela. In fact, they even had Chico Escuela Day, pregame ceremony in spring training before Yankees-Mets game back in the late 1970s. And Phil Rizzuto bought it hook, line, and sinker that this guy was once a Met. I was going to drop this Wally Pipp, except I watched the first episode of Jeopardy this season, season 37, episode 1, where he was, who was Wally Pipp, was one of the answers. And in terms of who was Wally Pipp, he played first base with the New York Yankees. I was going to drop this. This happened June 1st, 1925, or June 2nd, 1925. 96 years ago. Who's going to remember Wally Pipp? But it was on Jeopardy. Wally Pipp was beamed. He was hit in the head, missed a couple of games, still had a headache, wasn't ready to play. But Lou Gehrig was in Hartford, and he was ready to play. He was a 23-year-old stud. They brought him up, and the rest is history. He never missed a game until the ALS caught up with him. So there was a moral of the story: never call in sick because somebody might, and I heard this as growing up in the 1960s, don't be Wally Pipp. And that person might take your job and do it better than you. Wally Pipp. People don't get Wally Pipped anymore. Cigarettes in baseball, Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. He looks like he's sitting on Old Sparky over in Sing Sing. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Now the cough in a carload, Babe Ruth. Chesterfield, the baseball man cigarette. Bucky Harris, the manager of the world champion 1947 Yankees, and Bob Elliott, the 47. National League most valuable player with the Boston Braves, and Teddy Ballgame, Ted Williams of the Red Sox holding that up. Stan Musial, somebody looks like it knocked out, they knocked out one of his front teeth to stick that cigarette in. Joe D, I guarantee he didn't pay for that cigarette. Ewell Blackwell, who is a pitcher with the Cincinnati Reds. When you change to Chesterfield, the first thing you will notice is their mildness, the baseball man's cigarette. Joe Garagiola is a guy I knew. He was Yogi's friend from St. Louis from the time they were 2 years old to Yogi's passing when he was 90. Joe outlived him just slightly. And Joe once said to me, you know, with Yogi, when he steps in it, he steps in it. And he was talking about business-wise. Yoo-hoo made Yogi a lot of money, the drinking champions. Mickey drank it, maybe with some Cutty Sark in there. Hey, Moose Gowan, who was with Washington at that time, the longtime Yankee, he drank it too. Really nice guy, great storyteller. Used to love hanging out with him, listening to his stories. And Elston Howard also drank Yoo-hoo. Here's what Garagiola meant. Yogi goes to a New Jersey country club and runs into the Oliveri family. And they're the brains behind Yoo-hoo. And they're having a lot of trouble getting it on the shelves. And I thought, personally, Yoo-hoo tasted like chocolate and water mixing together. It wasn't great. I mean, I drank it because, you know, it's Yoo-hoo. I didn't really like it all that much. But the Oliveri say, hey, why don't you test this out? And he does. And they said, well, what do you think? I like it. How'd you like to join us? And he did. He's on board. He makes a ton of money off of it. Here's a Dave Kaplan story. And there are a number of Yogi books that he ghost wrote, some of which might be in the library. One time I was in the office, and when the phone rang, when no one else was around, I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. He sold Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything sure makes swell salads. He sold batteries. I remember putting water in the battery in my 1966 Chevrolet Caprice station wagon. I drove tooled around in when I was 17 years old. Yogi Berra says, I add only 3 times a year water. It's 1950s. Oh, he sold beer, the Miller Lite beer, which also brought in baseball players like Marvelous Marv Throneberry and Boog Powell, the former Baltimore Oriole first baseman, and Jim Honachek, who played or as blind as a bat, the former umpire in the Miller All-Star Series. And this Christmas, ask Mom and Dad for a Shelby, the winner's bike. Tell them Yogi sent you. Joe D. in Maryland, guaranteed, didn't pay for that cigarette, didn't pay for the drink, didn't pay if he got dinner at Stock Club, didn't pay for anything. That was Joe D. Joe D., as Phil Rizzuto once told me, had short arms and long pockets. On January 14th, 1954, DiMaggio and Marilyn elope in San Francisco. 10 months later, Marilyn filed for divorce, citing only mental cruelty. I've heard a lot of stories over the years. Most of these guys have passed on, from Tom Tresh to Johnny Blanchard, who all heard the same story about mental cruelty. And they said, and it's hearsay to me about the cruelty, apparently something happened the night that this scene was shot from 7 Year Itch. This was Stamford, Connecticut in July of 2017. And the parishioners at the First Congregational Church behind Marilyn complained because the first thing that they did when they flung the door open was seeing Marilyn's backside. And to the left, and to your right, my left, and Marilyn's left, there was another church. Right in the middle of the churches, they put 26-foot Marilyn, who tours the country, didn't tour the country last year, and is part of outdoor art. Stanford has outdoor art every year, and that was the only year Marilyn was there. But apparently, DiMaggio and Marilyn had some problems that night. And anyway, she filed for divorce real quick. See, the problem with Marilyn and Joe, as it's been told by me, by a lot of the former Yankees, was he wanted a stay-at-home wife. He wanted his dinner on the table when he got home. He wanted somebody less famous than he was, and he wanted somebody making less money than he did. 0 for 4. He took an 0 for with Marilyn. They were talking about getting married again in 1962, but she died from the drug overdose, and he sent a red rose to her crypt every day after that. Mrs. Robinson, Paul Simon, Where Have You Gone, Joe DiMaggio, which started out life as Mrs. Roosevelt. We didn't start the fire. Joe is in that Billy Joel song, Joltin' Joe from the 1940s. Hey, Duke Ellington, did you see Jackie hit that ball? It came out in 1947 after Jackie made his debut on April 15th, 1947. And Therese Brewer's Mickey. You've probably heard this song 15,000 times if you've heard it once. Mrs. Robinson, back with old friends and bookends. It is Paul Simon's, probably his biggest seller, or Bridge Over Troubled Waters, but this one probably was bigger. I've heard stories about Joe and Paul Simon meeting for dinner from Whitey Ford, and Whitey said that Joe just walked in, went to Paul Simon, and the first thing he said was, what do you mean, where have I gone? I'm here, I'm with you. I did a Bowery commercial, doing a Mr. Coffee commercial. I haven't gone anywhere, I'm around. And Paul Simon said that, well, you know, you were one of my heroes. You last played baseball in 1951. You're a hero. What do you mean? I'm gone. I'm with you, you know, so I'm not missing. Where have you gone? And that went on all night, according to the Yankee players. Dick Cavett had Paul Simon on and decided to talk about the song, and talking about Mickey Mantle, who hated DiMaggio. Mantle looked at DiMaggio as a guy who loafed on the ball during the 1951 World Series, and he had to run as fast as he could, tripped over a drain, ripped up his knee, and his knee bothered him the rest of his career. DiMaggio, looking to his left, is looking at this blonde goddess chiseled from earth. His name is Mantle, and he's going to be the star that Joe can't be anymore. So they hated each other. And Paul Simon said that, according to the guys who told me, that he was looking for a hero, and he thought about Eleanor Roosevelt, and then Ted Williams, and then settled on DiMaggio. Anyway, he told Dick Cavett, I said that I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero, and genuine heroes were in short supply. He accepted the explanation, thanked me, we shook hands, said goodnight. That was the end of dinner, and I'm sure Paul was left with the tab. Cabot then asked why Mickey Mantle wasn't used. Why use DiMaggio? And according to Whitey and those guys, Mickey asked him, and he said, Mickey Mantle doesn't work here. Joe DiMaggio does. Apparently, Paul didn't know of the history between DiMaggio and Mantle. Paul Simon tells Dick Cabot, it's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. One quick story. Joe and Mickey used to fight over who should be out last at Old Timers Day, so they get the biggest applause. Joe also had in his contract that wherever he went, he had to be known as the world's greatest living baseball player. And one year, Mickey was drunk. Okay, he was totally drunk, and he found out that DiMaggio was going to be announced last. And this is Friday night. He decides to go home to Dallas, and he left George Steinbrenner fuming, absolutely fuming. George used to pay those guys $125,000 each to show up at Old Timers Day. Terry Cashman and I share the same periodontist who I saw on Monday. He was the baseball balladeer. He wrote the song Willie, Mickey, and the Duke Talking Baseball. Somebody missing from that picture. It's not Claude Rains. It's supposed to be Joe DiMaggio. He was walking in with the great center fielders, Duke Snyder, Joe D, Willie, and Mickey. Notice there's somebody between Joe D and Mickey. This is at Shea Stadium in Old Timers Day, and Joe doesn't fit into the song. Terry asked Joe asked Terry about that, and he says, it's about the 1950s, and Joe said, yeah, you're right. I wasn't part of the 1950s. Phil Rizzuto has a gold record. He's in the Hall of Fame. Only guy in the Hall of Fame with a gold record. And Meatloaf used to live here in Westchester. He and I were talking about Rizzuto being on Paradise by the Dashboard Light out of the Bat Out of Hell album, which is Meatloaf's only really huge selling album. He said they wanted Phil on the record. It's about a guy and a girl in a car, and it's a baseball scene playing out in the car where the guy wants to score the winning run. But she says, the only way we're going to do it is if you marry me. And so they have Rizzuto in the studio, and he is not being Phil Rizzuto. It took him about 100 takes before he read his lines correctly for the record. And he got a gold record out of it. He never knew what it was about until his kids told him what it was about. They were going to school in Boston in the late 70s when the song came out. The player is an aggressive base runner. He's trying to get to second. He's safe. Trying to get to third. He's safe. And eventually he would score on the suicide squeeze. And then he's at the end of the song saying, I'm praying for the end of time so he could get rid of this woman. I said to Scooter, I said, you never knew what it was about. He said, Huckleberry, he fooled me. I said, did you get back the gold record? No. Baseball cards, baseball cards, baseball cards as we get to very near the end here. Cy Berger invented the modern baseball card in 1951 and threw bubblegum in there. And so many periodontists and oral surgeons say, thank you, Cy, for making us rich, because a lot of people chewed that gum and ruined their teeth. Anyway, the baseball card could teach you how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, in case you were interested in updating a guy's statistics. It was your entree to gambling, because you used to flip cards, trade cards. Oops, that one went away. You throw them down. Oh, I got two heads here, so I won that one. Going to Atlantic City or maybe even up to Monticello at that casino you got up there, you might have baseball cards for teaching you how to gamble. Geography, well, Oakland A's on the front of this card, so you might want to look up Oakland in a map. And they made great bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in the spokes of the tire, put the baseball cards in, and then it made that sound. It sounded really cool. But today, there are no real new songs about baseball. Literature, not much, which reminds me of Yogi. Dave Kaplan told me this story. It's in one of the books. Ernest Hemingway You got the Ken Burns. Ken Burns did Hemingway, and he did baseball. Anyway, on PBS. Anyway, Hemingway is down in the Yankees clubhouse one day, and he's being introduced to all the players: Mickey Mantle, Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Ernest Hemingway. Yeah, he gets to Yogi, and they say, Ernest Hemingway, here's Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi sticks out his hand and says, hey, Ernie, what paper you write for? Kansas City Star. Perfect. Just another sport. By the way, Hemingway's Old Man in the Sea, there is a reference to the great DiMaggio. It's just another sport today. Homer Simpson honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2017. With Casey at the bat, John Fogerty, center field, a league of their own. Who is on first? But no, Take Me Out to the Ballgame, oddly enough. Although that song is in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. This is me in 1988 talking to Joe Namath, my buddy Bruce Morton. We ran together the streets of New York in the 1980s. Occasionally he joins me on this talk, actually in football talk as we talk about Joe. This is the 20th anniversary of the Jets winning at Wingfoot Golf Club in Mamaroneck. And Joe cements football as the #1 sport in America, spectator-wise, after the Jets win the Super Bowl in 1969. In 1950, baseball, horse racing, and boxing dominated American sports. By 1965, football surpassed baseball as the #1 sport, and maybe basketball has surpassed baseball, and baseball has dropped to 3. At least if you look at the average age of the baseball fan who watches on TV, which is 61 years old now. Muhammad Ali was bigger than boxing, bigger than anything in the 70s. But boxing has faded away in the United States. Horse racing is being saved by gambling in the, or casino gambling in the stands. That's Jim Bouton. You probably have the book Ball 4, written in 1969, about an aging knuckleball pitcher who is trying to hang on. Jim and I had a relationship over the years. He was an interesting character. He passed away a couple of years ago up in the Berkshires. We used to have conversations. This is the only time we were on the stage next to each other. I came after him. We used to crisscross. He would be there 2 weeks before me. I'd be there 3 weeks after him. Jim Bouton, nice guy, really nice guy, very smart guy. With Ball 4, which humanized players, and according to the New York Public Library, one of the 20 most influential books of the 20th century. It was used as part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended baseball's reserve clause, which tied the player in perpetuity to a team once he signed the contract, and the only way the player could get out was if he was released or traded. That's me on the red carpet in Philadelphia. I am in that movie, Sons of Ben. Soccer outdoes baseball today, TV ratings, which is kind of strange, I suppose, to somebody like me, and they get more young people watching than baseball, soccer. And we end with, it ain't over until it's over. No, it ain't over until it's over. You know, nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. If you take a fork if you see a fork in the road, take it. If you don't go to their funeral, they're not going to go to your funeral. Yogi's wife, Carmen, once said to Yogi, hey, Yogi, you know, you grew up in St. Louis, you played with the Yankees, and you've lived all your life, or all your adult life in New Jersey. Where do you want to be buried? Surprise me. It gets late early out there, talking about the shadows at Yankee Stadium in the World Series when the sun is falling in the sky. Also, Yogi, the future ain't what it used to be, and Yogi also has been quoted more in Supreme Court arguments than anybody else in the history of the United States Supreme Court. If you're expecting a huge story, it ain't over until it's over. You're going to be disappointed. But I'll tell you the story anyway. It's 1973. Yogi's team, the Mets, have a lot of injuries. And they're just hanging in there, playing about .500 baseball. But they're fortunate. The National League East, nobody's running away with it. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Montreal, they're all bunched up. But the Mets are a few games out of first place. And there is very little margin for error. Virtually Yogi's team's got to win every game. And they lose a game. And they're at Shea Stadium, and they're in the manager's office. They're all together in the manager's office, the writers and Yogi. And Mike Dyer brings up the fact that time's running out. And Yogi, and then he says, well, is it over yet, Yogi? And Yogi's answer was, it ain't over till it's over, except it's over. I want to thank Marie for inviting me. I want to thank people who have sat here and listened to me. And that's the last time I saw Yogi. On June 26th, 2011, we had me and Brian Cashman were two of the featured speakers at the Yogi Berra Museum that day. Well, thank you, Marie, for inviting me. And thanks everybody else for attending. Any questions, any comments, feel free. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Evan. We're just about closing the library now, so we'll use your last quote there.
Ain't over until it's over. Anybody else who has anything? Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will send a copy of this. If you have anything you want to put in the box, or if you have any comments, feel free. I'll give you another minute, and then we'll pull the plug on this thing. And I have recorded this, so it will go to the library. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
That
you.
was great.
And I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye. Would somebody say something?
I said thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay.
Got a funny story for you.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My son is an athletic director in Maine, but he's been athletic director in a number of schools. He also had a part-time job working for the Yankees. He still has it, but because he lives in Maine now, he can't do much. He met Phil Rizzuto at the Yankees in the press box, and he took a picture with him. And then Phil Rizzuto was running out. So he said, wait a minute, Scooter, take one more. And Phil Rizzuto said to him, don't worry, I'll see you again. And then he died.
Oh.
It was so heartbreaking.
Scooter was an interesting character.
Yeah, he was.
Really.
My son has that picture in his office.
Yeah, well, cool. I mean, Scooter was an interesting character. So, real interesting character. I have a very quick Bill White story with Scooter. They are in Detroit, Scooter and Bill. And it's the 8th inning.
What?
The 8th. And they're going into, Scooter says, you want any coffee? And to White. And he says, yeah. So he goes out there and he runs into Ernie Harwell, who's one of the great guys, great guy, Ernie Harwell. Loved him. When the Tiger Stadium was demolished, I said to him, what do you want to take out of Tiger Stadium? He said, I want the visiting clubhouse urinal. I said, why? He said, because all the greats went there. But anyway, to make a long story short, Scooter is with Harwell and goes back to the hotel. The next day, there's a production meeting, and Bill White looks at him, and he's bringing this coffee into everybody. And Bill White said, why are you bringing us coffee? He said, because I said I was going to bring you back coffee, and here it is. After that, Bill put his index finger in Scooter's pants to make sure he didn't disappear. So, well, anyway.
I crossed paths with Steinbrenner once.
Yeah.
Oh, God, a long time ago. Must have been in the 70s. I was a cab driver in New York.
Yeah.
And he was coming out of, I think it was the 21 Club.
Yeah.
It was at night, maybe 9 o'clock in the evening. And he's walking up, somebody came and hailed a cab, and I stopped, and he come walking up the steps, and he looks at me and like he knows that everybody recognizes him. And he says, "How you doing?" I said, "Okay." And that was it. First time. But it felt good to see him.
George used to call Eddie Einhorn and Jerry Reinsdorf, the owners of the White Sox, the Abbott and Costello of baseball.
When I went to the Baseball Hall of Fame many, many years ago, I think it's right in the front. It's like the first thing you see is Abbott and Costello.
Yeah.
Unless they moved it.
I don't know. I haven't been up there in a while, but yeah, Abbott and Costello, and Babe Ruth has a whole floor for himself. So
I haven't been there in God, I probably 40 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, they've changed.
I'm going to be 80 soon.
Yeah. Well, you sound great for 80. Sound great. What's your son's name, by the way? I might have run into him.
Jason Fine.
I don't. I knew a guy named Mark Fine. Nah, probably not.
Jason is he's the athletic director at Bates College.
Oh, okay. Where Dick Yerg, who was one of my first sports editors, Dick Yerg went to Bates in Maine.
He did quite a few people. What's his name? Brian Gumbo went there.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
The bad Gumble, as opposed to the good Gumble, Greg Gumble. That's their nicknames. The good Gumble and bad.
Quite a few. It's a really good school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, he's the, I forget. He was just awarded athletic director of the year for Division III.
Yeah.
For the second time, I think 2 years in a row.
That sounds great.
He's well known in the business.
Sounds like he's done a good job over the years. So.
He has, but what he should do is go. A lot of guys, get in a position like that. They don't want to take the big leap. They like being big fish in a small pond. Is
he happy?
Oh, he loves what he's doing. Yeah, he's happy.
That's all that counts.
But he could go ahead. He could have had a job with the Yankees.
Well. He enjoys his life, though.
You remember when the Yankees won that World Series? What was it? 96,
96, 97, 99, and 2000.
Well, whatever. One of those years. Yeah, he was working. It was when he was volunteering at the Yankees. He was young. He was volunteering, and he went with them to celebrate. He was. In a limousine with, I forget, the Paul O'Neill, and others. He loved it. He loved being with them.
Oh, I imagine so.
Yeah.
So, well, I want to thank you.
Good talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
And I want to thank Marie for inviting me, and hopefully we could do this again sometime in the future. So
she might have a cup of coffee ready for you over there.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good night then.
You too. Bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye.